Moving on to personal knowledge. So, as we all know, building from the process of relationships, these processes in ongoing, continuous relationships, they help you gain personal knowledge about people and meaning creation. So, we all have a relationship or something that we have some meaning between both us and that other person. And they provided a really good example about how meanings can have multiple meanings instead of just one. So, for example, it talks about content meaning. And so this is just the literal meaning of a saying or a word. So the example they provide is clean your room now. And this obviously just means go clean your room right now. But the second level of that is relationship meaning. And this describes how clean your room now from a parent to a child shows that this happens because the parent has the right to order the child around because there's an unequal power dynamic there. Whereas you say in a different way, would you mind cleaning your room? This may mean that the parent and the child relationship's a bit more on an equal level. So just a little play on words can show the difference of what that relationship means, how that relationship operates. So I hope that this lecture so far has just shown you how carefully to choose your words can mean to other people and what that can mean to other people. And this section goes on to talk about how within certain cultures they put an emphasis on content and relationship level. Meaning means different in a high context versus a low context culture. And within these relationship level meanings, there's 3 different dimensions. The first one is responsiveness, and this just shows how aware you are of others and how involved you are with them. So, for example, responsiveness is something that's really easy to determine in most cases. So for example, you're having a conversation with your friend and they constantly are looking down at their phone and not really paying attention to you. So that would be low responsiveness. And higher responsiveness would be, say you're out with your friend and they're giving you eye contact, they're providing you feedback, they're nodding when you speak, they're chatting back with you, etc. The second dimension is liking or affection. And we communicate like or dislike through our facial expressions and other nonverbal cues, such as glaring, scowling, looking angry, how close you sit with someone, or how far away you sit away from someone. And the third dimension is power or control. And in many relationships, the power is imbalanced. So, for example, a teacher to student, parent to child, coach or athlete, doctor to patient, etc. But in most cases, the person who has less power challenges the person who has more. Really, the biggest reasons for bringing up these dimensions is to help you understand that there's many components to meanings that happen within relationships. What I'll recommend you guys doing is, if you have questions at this point, to go ahead and write them down or to type them in a separate document and to make sure that you guys ask them within the discussion forum. So there's several models of communication, of interpersonal communication and how they work. And the first one is the linear models. And this assumes that communication is linear. It's a one-way process in which individuals, and truthfully, all that I care that you know about linear models is that they don't work and that they're not accurate. They make communication seem like they're only going in one direction from sender receiver. It also assumes that the listener and or the receiver never sends messages to the sender because they just change the name for it. And again, one of the main reasons I'm skipping over this is because if you guys ever go down communication path, you'll go into these theories much more in depth. And at this point, I do not believe that they matter. And of course, if you guys have questions, I'd be happy to go over it. This model is viewed to be more accurate because it emphasizes the roles that happen within communication, as well as that messages can have noise and fields of experience. And what it means by fields of experience is that we can have new interactions with new people and have new experiences that change the way that we view the world. Additionally, going back to the different roles that people can have in communication is that the sender can also be the receiver and the receiver can also be the sender. And I realize that this is pretty common sense, but I just want to make sure that we cover it so that you know that the transactional model can have different roles. So, for example, whenever you're interacting with someone, whenever you nod at them, you're giving feedback to them that you're listening, that you're interested, and that you're interpreting what they're saying. So again, just a note, if there's any questions from this past section, please write them down or put them in the discussion forum. Now moving on to principles of interpersonal communication on page 29. So there are 8 basic principles for effective interpersonal communication. Principle 1, we cannot not communicate. And this basically means there's no way to avoid communicating. Even if we're passing someone on the street, they may interpret something we do, even if we don't say or do anything, or we don't think that we do at least. The book says even if we choose to be silent, we're communicating. And this is so true because your silence could mean something to them. And in all actuality, it could mean something to you as well. And going back to the meaning part of the interpersonal communication, that relationship meaning and that high context culture and the low context culture, in this same paragraph on page 30 talks about how Westerners, they're more verbal within their culture. Therefore, if someone doesn't acknowledge them, that could mean something negative to them, whereas in other cultures, it would be normal. So the second principle is interpersonal communication is irreversible. And again, this is very common sense. We all understand that once you say something, it can never be taken back. So going back to that same idea that your words matter and they have an impact on others, and that you should be a responsible person and careful about the things that you communicate to others. And this section just emphasizes the importance of ethics and how we deal with ethics every day. Principle number 4, people construct meaning in interpersonal communication. And again, this is something that you will go into depth if you go on to communication studies. So we are not going to go into too much depth, but what I want you to know from this is that people use symbols such as words or the things that they do, the things that they say, those are all symbols. And depending on the type of relationship that you have, such as if you're in a close relationship, will depend on the type of meaning that you might make of that relationship. So principle number 5 is meta-communication affects meaning. So meta-communication, just communication about communication, and it's a way that you can kind of just check in with people. I think this book does a really good job at explaining ways that people may use meta-communication. And what I want you to know about meta-communication is that it can increase understanding and it can increase relationships as well as improve the quality of communication with someone else. Another way that we may use communication is to check on others' understanding of what you're saying. So if you see someone that's confused, that seems confused, you can always say, was that clear? Do I need to explain that again? This can be a complicated. Principle number 6, interpersonal communication develops and sustains relationships. And this is basically the idea that people in interpersonal relationships use communication to build, refine, and transform relationships. So think of kind of like in the same example they give on page 34 of people in a relationship and how they use communication to improve their relationship. And that's all that I care that you guys know about that. Principle number 7, interpersonal communication is not a panacea. If you don't know what the word panacea means, it just means a solution or remedy for all difficulties or diseases. All I want you to know is that communication is not the fixer of all things. However, it can help, but of course, there's things that cannot be fixed with communication alone. Interpersonal communication has a ton of strengths, but of course, like anything, it has its limitations. Principle number 8, interpersonal communication effectiveness can be learned. And this is the idea that there's some people are just born to be really good communicators. And of course, people have some talents over others, but this book is to encourage you that you're capable of competent communication as well. So drop any questions that you guys have in this. I hope I've been pretty clear about what I want you to know. And I realize that this may be hard had you not read the book before listening to this. But again, if you have any questions, please write them down or put them in the discussion forum.